call the member for Bass.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise today to speak on the VET student loan bills currently before this House. These bills will introduce a new VET student loans program to replace the VET help scheme from January 2017. Certainly I agree with the major stakeholders that the existing VET fee help scheme requires urgent reform. Several improvements have been proposed with these bills. These are capping student loans, linking funding to student progress and completion, linking publicly funded courses to industry need and skills shortages, and requiring providers to reapply under new standards so only high-quality providers could access the loan system. I particularly welcome the commitment made by the government in the second reading speech to establish a VET loans ombudsman, a proposal that Labor moved in the Senate almost a year ago. Funnily enough, when Labor proposed these very reforms prior to the last election, the Liberals could not criticise them enough. On capping student loans, the Treasurer said it would pull the rug out from under the private education industry, whilst the Minister for Education stated that the policy was, I quote, an ill-considered flat pack. At the time, the Minister further criticised a price cap, saying it would simply, in effect, establish a government-sanctioned price. He is now himself proposing three different price caps, that is $5,000, $10,000 and $15,000. What we have now is a complete change of direction from the government, another backflip from the Liberals, who are trying to take credit for reforms that have been Labor policy for months. However, I would also suggest that these bills do little, if anything, to provide redress for students who have been the victims of dodgy providers and those who have been left saddled with unfair VET fee help debts. The vocational education system has fallen into crisis under this government, this Liberal government's watch. With 5 ministers in 3 years and a blowout in the cost of VET fee help scheme, it is clear that this government simply doesn't care about vocational education or, significantly, about TAFE. In 2013, VET fee help loans were sitting at around $700 million. This has skyrocketed in the last 2 years to a staggering $2.9 billion in 2015, and it is estimated that up to 40% of VET fee help loans will never be repaid. We hear that some students have been tricked by unscrupulous providers into racking up massive debts. We also hear that thousands of qualifications in Victoria have been cancelled because they are not worth the paper that they are written on. Where was the government when all this was happening under its watch? How can they possibly justify to taxpayers their failure to do anything about this until now? With these bills before the House, given the government has finally taken action, what the government faces now is a challenge of implementation. In particular, I look forward to how the establishment of a VET loans ombudsman is achieved, given that there is no provision for this important office in these bills. It is absolutely critical that the Ombudsman has the resources and the powers it needs to redress for students and to protect their interests. Mr Speaker, I would also hope that the government ensures that the students and reputable providers are treated fairly in the transition process. Just last week, I received an email from a local vocational education provider who, under this legislation, will be precluded from applying as a VET student loan course provider. This particular provider has received several national awards that reflect their high standards of governance and their community contribution. They presently employ 64 staff and have around 1,200 VET fee help students enrolled in their courses. This legislation requires them and another 12 training providers acting as body corporates to a trustee to almost immediately implement change to their organisational structure. I certainly understand that it is appropriate for accountability purposes to make such changes so as to restrict the operating entity to ensure that directors are liable for the administration of their operating entity, and hence that an interposed trust is not an appropriate vehicle for governance purposes. Whilst I understand that some changes as to structure of the industry were raised some time ago, They have advised me that at no stage with this particular reform canvassed in any industry consultation, and that such a change will have a detrimental impact upon their ability to continue to deliver quality educational services, or, in the alternative, will require restructure of the business operating entity, requiring taxation and legal advice and transfer of staff and assets. Not to mention that staff redundancies might occur as current students complete courses, with the provider being unable to take on further students without restructure. It must be of concern to all in this House that industry participants claim inadequate consultation with respect to such a fundamental change in the operation of a business. It speaks to this government's failure to consult, or in the alternative, inadequate consultation, that participants in this industry are able to complain that changes first proposed some years ago have not been adequately explained to an industry. Labor understands the urgency of these bills, but yet again, as with the backpacker tax backflip, it's an urgency the government has brought on itself. We hope that the Senate inquiry into the bill will give the stakeholders a chance to properly examine these issues, because the government did not or had not consulted adequately with students or the sector on the details of these changes. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm also particularly concerned that the creative and arts communities are being disadvantaged by the Turnbull government to the VET student loans program. Of over 70 creative arts courses previously eligible for funding through the VET student loans program, only 13 are now available according to the government's new published criteria. In announcing the funding cuts, Minister for Education and Training Simon Birmingham stated that, I quote, "VET student loans will only support legitimate students to undertake worthwhile and value-for-money courses at quality training providers." I would like to question the minister as to why the Liberals are effectively imposing a restriction based upon assumed value or worth of the creative arts in higher education for the community. I am genuinely concerned that the government's neoliberal ideology is damaging for our community, and this short-sighted and short-term thinking is indicative of a government out of its depth rather than embracing the cultural positives for the community associated with arts funding in all of its forms. The moment you decide that only wealthy people can afford to be trained in the performing arts because certain areas will not be publicly supported, you've effectively decided that merit doesn't matter, or that particular artistic areas are less worthy. The government should not be dictating to the arts community which higher education courses should or should not receive funding on the basis that artistic endeavours are too esoteric to lead to employment. It is creative and artistic endeavours that are crucial for facilitating innovation and new ideas that drive economic growth and industry achievement. Certainly, this Prime Minister lauds the idea of Australia as the innovation nation, but with policy like this before us, I wonder if he knows what it takes to be truly innovative. The test that this Education Minister is using to decide which courses are worthy of government support are, I believe, quantitative in measure. This certainly seems to be true of arts and creative courses. I would like to take a moment to highlight the fact that some of our greatest thinkers and some of the greatest innovators of our time are individuals whose contributions to science, technology, engineering and mathematics have underpinned some of the most important discoveries of our time, and these people were first and foremost creatives whose innovations stemmed from their artistic pursuits. Sir Isaac Newton, for example, regarded as the modern father of what we now know as physics, was set on his path to learning not through science but with a Bachelor of Arts. He earned that in 1665. In fact, Newton owned more books on humanistic learning than he did on maths or science. An interesting fact about Albert Einstein, surely one of the greatest thinkers of our age, is that he was an amateur musician who declared, and I quote, Life without playing music is inconceivable to me. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. I get joy in life from music. Futurist Nikola Tesla dedicated his scientific work to finding ways in which the Earth's energy sources could be made available to all. He believed that we can water the energies, such as positive mental energy. They are in the music of Bach or Mozart, or in the verses of great poets. And of course Leonardo da Vinci, whose pursuits in science, invention, architecture, sculpture, anatomy, geology and engineering are one of the greatest examples of creative spirit driving innovation. It is exactly this type of innovation that the government may stifle with its cuts to the VET student loan program. Mr Deputy Speaker, I've recently had the pleasure of attending Junction Arts Festival in my electorate of Bass. Situate in and around Launceston and public and private spaces throughout the community, this is an annual 5-day event which is a mix of performance and visual art. The festival revenue is generated through sponsorship and government funding, with a particular focus on free audience experiences. The positive social impacts of participation in the arts in regional communities are many. Accessibility to the arts have been identified as a key driver for social cohesion in communities like my electorate of Bass, facilitating retention of young people in our community. I would particularly like to point to events like Junction providing the spark which engages young people into a career in the arts or other creative and innovative industries. Junction Arts Festival is a perfect example of how investment in the arts and creative industries can facilitate social cohesion, innovation and economic drivers in our local communities. But events like Junction Arts Festival can't flourish unless they are appropriately supported by government. The loss of government funding of some 60 arts diplomas as the result of these changes to eligibility will be a significant detriment to individuals looking to pursue a career in the artistic or creative industries. The Liberals have deemed a variety of courses like screen acting, art therapy, jewellery making, social media marketing, animation, dance and many others as lacking employment opportunity and therefore not suitable for subsidising. This is hugely insulting to educational providers, arts festival and arts program coordinators and indeed the wider arts community in Australia as a whole. Talented students with a passion and drive to pursue creative careers, especially those students from disadvantaged backgrounds, will be left without any access to study in their chosen field, limiting their employment opportunities and the ability to contribute to their community. I'm thinking in particular about the thriving arts community in northern Tasmania, with events like Junction, 10 Days on the Island and the Festival of Voices. Professional companies like TasDance, Stomp and Dance and Design Tasmania, and exhibition centres like QV Mag, the Academy Gallery and our many National Trust sites, not to mention the myriad of niche artists and boutiques that are absolutely unique to our region. Without adequate support in their educational endeavours, the very people whose passions and talents are the driving forces behind our artistic achievements will lose the opportunity to share their skills and knowledge with like-minded individuals and the wider community, meaning the creative industries and the arts will inevitably struggle. Mr Deputy Speaker, VET, TAFE and apprenticeships are crucial to jobs and our economy. I would add my concerns to the list of those who are worried about the questions being asked by the Assistant Minister for Skills as to whether or not the National Partnership for Skills was ever needed in the future, and her plans to meet with the states to determine, and I quote, whether there are reforms to VET that warrant a new agreement. Given that the National Partnership expires in the middle of next year, leaving over $500 million of government funding essentially up in the air, it is extremely concerning to me that the Minister is seemingly unclear on the need for a new agreement to help supporting TAFE. Labor knows that TAFE is the That is the backbone of our apprenticeship and technical skills education system, which is why we took a TAFE funding guarantee the last election. There are 28,000 people in Tasmania currently involved in TAFE. We need to support our TAFE system.
I thank the member for Bass. Question is the amendment be agreed to?